Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Intuitive Angling. Hope everybody's having a good day out there today, and really appreciate you guys making some time to check the video out. Today I'm going to show you guys my floating swim jig technique. This is something that I've never talked about before. We're right in the middle of swim jig season here, and I'm going to show you a method and a technique about fishing a swim jig that you probably never heard before that really works good this time of year. And real quick before we get started here, just wanted to give you guys a weekly reminder. If you haven't had a chance yet, go by and check out fishthemoment.com, our lake map breakdowns. Matt Steffen, myself, Johnny Schultz, we're building these lake map breakdowns for lakes all across the country, every season of the year. It's one of the if you don't know much about a certain lake, or even if you know a lot about a lake and you want to learn more areas and know how to fish the areas, this is a super great resource on there. So you can check it out. fishthemoment.com. I'll include the link in the description. Much appreciated. Okay guys, we are in the smack dab middle of swim jig season right now. I think that really probably from the middle of May to the middle of June, in my opinion, is the premium time to fish a swim jig. I mean, it could be earlier and later, and sometimes they'll hit a swim jig all year long as the water's over 55 degrees. But this is really the best time to fish it, because when those fish are sort of in a post-spawn phase and they're actively feeding, which they do in the post-spawn, this is the time that you want to fish a swim jig. Now, most people that fish a swim jig, they'll fish it with, like a 3/8 ounce or half-ounce swim jig with some type of a curly-tailed trailer like this Zoom Z-Craw. A lot of guys use like a Rage Craw or Speed Craw or something like that. But the traditional swim jig is you throw it out there, they got a flapping leg trailer, fish come up and hit it. What I'm going to talk to you guys today is about using the chunk type trailer like this Zoom Super Chunk here, set up with a specific type of jig. So what we have here with what I'm talking about, the floating technique, is that the weight on a swim jig has a lot to do with the way that it looks in the water. Excuse me, looks in the water, and how fast you can reel that swim jig through the water column. So specifically what I'm talking about when I'm talking about floating a swim jig is this setup here. It's a light head. This is a 3/16 ounce head, which is a super light head for a swim jig. And this Zoom Super Chunk on there, this is a fairly large trailer, and it really slows the fall of a jig, simply because of the mass of the legs on it here. So when you put a light head and a large trailer on this bait will sink real slow. So the floating swim jig, what it does, and I'm going to explain to you guys how to work the rod tip, but when you have this combination of a light head and a bulky trailer, it allows this bait to like go through the water, and this tail just sort of slow motion like this goes through the water. So when I'm working it, I'm going to show you guys how to work it here in a second. You know, the jig is going like this, coming through the, well, it's hard to explain, but it's just sort of undulating through the water like that, high in the water column. So what you can do is you take this and you put it on heavy line, 25-pound test fluorocarbon. I don't like braided line with this technique, because the braided line with no stretch in it, you can't really get that undulation that I'm talking about. 25-pound test, Seaguar and VizX line, and a flipping stick. So I use a 7.5 foot Megabass Alkalies flipping stick. I'll throw it out there and I'll hold the rod tip real high, and I'm jerking it and I'm reeling it and just jerking it like that as it comes back. And since this head is so light, it allows me to reel that jig slow across the water like that. Because if I was using like a 3/8 or half and I tried to do like that, the jig would fall down too deep. But by doing this with the light head, this thing tends to float up close to the surface, and I keep it in sight all the time. And what I can do is I can swim this bait, past objects or just off the bank, in a slow motion deal like that. So it's the presentation that's a lot slower. Now this is key, guys, if you're fishing extremely shallow water that's dirty. This is a dirty water technique. And when I'm talking about dirty water, I'm talking about water visibilities anywhere between, say, 4 inches and maybe 12 inches. This is when this technique works the best right here. The slow floating swim jig does not work good in clear water. It's a dirty, stained water technique because it gives those fish time to find it. Most of the time, if you're dealing with dirty water in the post spawn like that, the fish are extremely shallow. They're setting up around shallow woods, stumps, shallow rocks, docks, shallow grass. Probably, if I had a choice of which to fish it in, I'm looking for like the water willows or some type of real shallow vegetation, pads. All that type of stuff is really good. Although, wood can be just as good. Another big key in this, guys, as the water temperature gets warmer, particularly up close to 80 degrees like into June, that's when you get back into those areas and look for little shade pockets. So what I'm talking about shade pockets is you can go back in a cove and there may not be much cover in there, but you may have some overhanging trees that is just throwing maybe this much shade off the bank. These fish will set up in those shade pockets just like they're using any other type of cover. So definitely chunk this floating swim jig around any shade patches you find, particularly in June. The reason this thing works so good in that super shallow water is this is the type of areas those bluegill and greater sunfish and different type of perch will spawn in. They spawn back in these, towards the back ends of the coves, like in all summer long really. Excuse me, and they'll get in, anywhere between 12 inches to 3 foot of water to spawn. And a lot of times these perch will spawn around any type of shade that's thrown off the bank. Now, the shade, what happens is the perch know sort of the banks that create shade on it. So for example, if you've got a bank that has an overhanging tree that produces shade at 1 p.m., a lot of times these perch, since this is something that's reproducible, these perch will build these beds in and around these shade pockets in the back of these coves, and that's when you can target it on the floating swim jig. Now there's two different colors that I use on this. I'll use some type of a perch pattern, and the perch pattern, what I mean by there, I've got a little bit of chartreuse in it, maybe some orange, and a green pumpkin trailer, maybe with the tail dipped orange or chartreuse on it. Something to resemble a perch is one color, and the other color I use is simply the shad pattern, the pearls, the whites, that type of stuff. Another thing on the swim jig, guys, here, see how uniform this is? Let me show you guys a tip right here. Take part of your skirt, the uniform skirt like this, and just rip it off. Rip like a 1/4 inch of it off. And it's going to give you a lot more of a irregular feature look on there, which will give you more bites. See how much different that looks on there? But here's my two setups, for the swim jigs right here. But anyway, guys, this is a technique a lot of people don't fish. Like I said, very few people fish the chunk type trailers on a swim jig. It's my preference. I feel that you get bigger bites on a swim jig with a chunk type trailer on it. And since the chunk trailer doesn't have any motion on it, you have to put all of the motion yourself on it. And that motion comes, from this undulating message from your rod tip like that. It's not, you can't just throw it out there like you would a swim jig with a curly tail on it and get bites on it. So guys, give it a try. Floating swim jig, deadly, deadly, deadly. If you got some stained water in your lake, something they don't see a lot. I've just whacked on so many lakes across the country. This is one of my favorite ways. Like if you're fishing a lake on the Arkansas River, like Lake Dardanelle, it's money down there when you get in the right type of conditions. So hope you guys enjoyed the tip. We'll talk to y'all later.